You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Live Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well. So, a few weeks ago, I asked you for your big questions on hormone therapy in the Hit Play Not Pause private Facebook group, and an avalanche ensued. And we could start a designated podcast on hormone therapy and still not properly answer each and every one. And that's because, as you'll hear all about this week, menopausal hormone therapy is personalized medicine. It has to be. Every single woman comes into menopause with a unique health history. Every single woman goes through menopause differently. Every single woman responds to hormones, both her own and the ones that she takes, in her own way. The hormone therapy she uses, if hormone therapy is right for her, comes down to her personal needs. So to kick off what I am sure will be more than one episode on this topic, this week, after 5+ years of doing Hit Play Not Pause, we're going to do a level set on hormone therapy. This week's guest, nationally recognized menopause expert Dr. Lauren Streicher, digs into hormone therapy research, what it tells us, what it doesn't, the types of research we should be looking at, why formulations matter, perimenopause versus postmenopause therapy, the cardiovascular implications of hot flashes, why hormone therapy needs to be personalized, and how every woman should approach her care. Lauren Streicher is a clinical professor of OBGYN at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, and she is the founding medical director of the Northwestern Medicine Center for Sexual Medicine and Menopause. She is a certified menopause practitioner of the Menopause Society and serves on the editorial board of the journal Menopause. She's also a best-selling author, has written multiple books, and has a tremendous Substack and great podcast of her own called Dr. Streicher's Inside Information, Menopause, Midlife, and more. And you can learn more about this incredible dynamic woman at drstreicher.com. I will put all of that in the show notes. I love sitting down with Lauren. She's been on the show a couple times before. She's a real treat. And I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Okay, before we get to it, give us a follow at Feisty Menopause on Instagram and Facebook. Come on over and join our private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook community. And while you're looking at the show notes, go in there and sign up for my free weekly Feisty 40+ newsletter with all the training and lifestyle news you can use. Quickly, before we get to it, very quick thanks to Phosis for keeping our skin so soft and moisturized. I just love Phosis skincare products, and I'm 100% sure you will too. So check those out in the show notes as well. Thank you, Phosis, for your support. All right, enough of me. Let's have a few words about those awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right. Good morning, Lauren. It's so good to see you as always.
Good morning. So happy to be here chatting with you.
So, boy, oh boy, the conversation around hormone therapy has really, really evolved, obviously, over the past 5 years since I got into this show, and it's not slowing down anytime soon, and it only seems to be getting
more confusing.
Yeah, I put out like, what do people want to know? And like 1,000 replies later. And obviously it's people all over the planet too. So what's going on in the UK is a bit different from what's going on here. But I guess I'm looking at this as a place to level set a little bit, because I look at the WHI and all the ink that has been spilled and the air that has been filled and the time and energy devoted to both tearing it down and propping it up. So I want to just, at this point in our time, what can it tell us? What can't it tell us? What are the value of these secondary analyses that keep coming out? What is your thought process on all of that?
Well, let's start by saying, to your point, people talk about menopause having a moment. And the truth is, for me, it's not having a moment. I've been at this for decades. and was in practice when the WHI came out. And the biggest issue with the WHI is not that it was a bad study, it is an excellent study. It is an excellent study. And when people say, well, it's been debunked, no, it has not been debunked. The problem with the WHI was not the data that was generated, it was how the media interpreted that data and the messages that went out both to healthcare clinicians and to women. And that's where the confusion starts. So let's just back up a little bit about what the WHI was and why it really is such a treasure trove of information. The WHI is the only large scale, prospective, randomized controlled study that we have on hormone therapy, meaning that in this study, you had three groups of women. You had women that were not taking hormone therapy. You were having women that were taking estrogen alone who did not have a uterus. And you had women who were taking both an estrogen and a synthetic progesterone, a progestogen, to protect the lining of the uterus. And then those women were followed prospectively. And the women did not know which group they were in. This was a blinded study. They had no idea if they were getting the dummy pill, a pill with just estrogen, or a pill with estrogen and the progestogen. So that's the beauty of this study. And that's why the information is so valuable, because you're not just looking at a group of people that are taking hormone therapy, and we'll talk about that a little bit with other studies. You're looking at people who did not know and were looking for the effect. And so if you look at these kinds of studies, this is basically if you take an antibiotic and you take 1,000 people and they all have a bladder infection and you give half the people the real antibiotic and you give half the people a dummy antibiotic, you're going to know if that antibiotic works or not. And that was the beauty of the WHI. And it has generated an enormous, enormous amount of information that needs to be taken within that context. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of sub-analyses because one of the biggest issues of the WHI is that the women in the WHI tended to be older.
Yep.
70% of women were over the age of 60. Why was that? One very simple reason. They didn't want people to know if they were getting the real stuff or the fake stuff. So therefore, they put together a group of women who were not having hot flashes because then it would have been obvious. The women with hot
Right.
flashes, if their hot flashes went away, they'd go, oh, I must be getting the real stuff. And the problem with that is that that population of women is not representative of women who are younger, who are in their 50s. And most important, and we'll talk about this more as we go along, women who are having hot flashes, which quite frankly is a different group of people. So let's think about this. You've got thousands of women who are in the WHI who are not having hot flashes. Why are they not having hot flashes? Either because they never had them, which is one group of women, or they had them, but they have already gone away. Your hot flashes last on average 7 to 10 years, depending on your ethnicity, right? So you have potentially the damage from the hot flashes. So that is the problem. And there's other things too. But big picture, when we look at the WHI data, it's so important to look at it in the context of who were the women in the study group. Because when we look at good studies, bad studies, and there are plenty of those out there, and we talk about cherry picking, which we can talk about. What's so important is not just the study itself, but the design of the study in terms of who's in that study, who's in that study. But if you know who's in the study and you evaluate that study, keeping that in mind, then you get good information. So that's kind of in a nutshell the WHI, in that we have outstanding information in a certain population getting a particular type of hormone therapy, which is the other caveat, is that the women in the WHI all got the same thing, which makes it a valuable study. One of the problems with other studies is people are getting all kinds of stuff. They're getting this kind of estrogen and that kind of estrogen. In the WHI, everyone got the same thing. They all got oral conjugated equine estrogens. They all got the same progestogen of the women that were getting a progestogen, which made it very easy to draw conclusions about that particular hormone therapy. So that's another limitation of the study. It doesn't make it a bad study. It means it's a limitation of the study. And all hormone therapy is not created equal. We talk about precision medicine, we have precision hormone therapy, and every kind of hormone therapy, whether it's oral, whether it's conjugated, synthetic, bioidentical, whatever, there's no the best hormone therapy. This is personalized medicine, and you need to know for your particular situation, for your particular medical background, for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, what is the best for you. And the WHI helps us a lot with that. Now, can we talk about the other kind of study, the observational study?
We can. Can I ask you one
Yes, yeah,
question
yeah,
before we
sure.
move on? You said a really key phrase in there that just slipped in, and I don't want to lose it. You said the damage from the hot flashes, and we can
Yeah,
circle back to this, but
yes.
I put a pin
Let's
in
talk
that.
about that. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what we know is that every time a woman has a hot flash, things happen in her body. We know that. We know the heart rate goes up. We know that there's a surge of cortisol. We know that there's an inflammatory response, which over time has an impact throughout the body on every blood vessel in the body. So when we talk about cardiovascular issues, women who have hot flashes are different than women who don't have hot flashes. We know that cardiovascular disease goes up postmenopause. We know that it goes up in women and not in men in that same age cohort. But we also know that it's the women who have hot flashes that are particularly at risk. And we know this from Rebecca Thurston's data and
Yep.
Swan, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But so, and when I talk about hot flashes, just to be clear, I'm not talking about the woman who, like, once a day has to take off her sweater. I'm talking about the woman who's having persistent, moderate to severe hot flashes because this damage is something that occurs over time. The
Right.
woman who's having hot flashes for 5 to 7 years, they're moderate to severe, they're
Yep.
persistent. That's the woman that I'm most worried about. That's the
Yep.
woman that I'm saying, no, this is not the time to dress in layers and tough it out. This is the time to do something about those hot flashes because every time you have a hot flash, in addition to the fact that it's impacting on sleep, and
Hmm.
sleep is critically important when it comes to health, it is also impacting on blood vessels throughout your body. So when we talk about the impact of menopause, I always think in terms of the flashers versus the non-flashers, which is a bit of an oversimplification, but I think it's an important caveat.
Well, we should also really, I mean, nobody likes to say vasomotor symptoms, but that hits a little different than hot, like I don't think people just make that connection between what's really happening and just I'm sweating.
That's
But I
correct.
but I also really want to then make sure that we take that phrase, that damage from hot flashes, and pin it back to the WHI,
Yeah.
which is where that came in, because the finding out of the WHI was women were having more issues with their cardiovascular disease, right? And if they had already existing damage from those hot flashes, that vasomotor, and then we're putting oral estrogen in the system, we're raising a risk.
Exactly. And that's the point. Because what happens is if you have blood vessels that already have plaque that
Yep.
build up in the blood vessels, and then you add oral estrogen on top of that, that plaque becomes what we refer to as complicated plaque, so
Yes.
that it is more likely to break off and go to the lungs for a blood clot in the lungs or go to the brain for a stroke. So when you look at women who have had 5 to 7 years of hot flashes and then start taking oral estrogen, that is a completely different population than women who are 48 years old and having hot flashes, and we give them hormone therapy to stop those hot flashes in terms of the impact that's going to have on cardiovascular damage, which, then brings us to the topic of, well, all these women who think, boy, I am screwed because I didn't take hormone therapy. And now I'm 65 years old and I want to start. And they come to
Yes.
me and say,
Yeah.
should I start? And my first question is, what's your goal? What do you
Hmm.
think you're going to accomplish by starting now? Because if you think it's going to prevent cardiovascular disease, it is not. If you think that it's going to somehow help with cognitive function, it is not. You have to look at what you are trying to accomplish. Is it going to help your bones? Maybe we need to look at your bones. Is it going to help your joints? Maybe let's look at that. But that's why, again, circling back, and this is something I'll keep returning to, personalized
Hmm.
medicine. It is not one size fits all.
And how can we then take all this valuable information that you've talked about And somehow overlay it with the prescriptions that we're using now, which are largely transdermal.
Yeah. So one of the things that's out there, if you will, is that bioidentical is always better and that transdermal is always better.
Mm,
And the interesting thing about bioidentical referring, let's just stick to estrogen for a second because that's easiest. If we talk about a bioidentical estrogen, this is basically an estrogen that mimics the estradiol that we make in our body. And on one hand, you say, okay, well, this makes sense because if we've lost our estradiol, then the best thing to do is replace our estradiol. But that's not always true. That's not always true because what we know, again, returning to personalized medicine, is that if we look at the conjugated estrogens, which get such a bad rap because they're not, quote, bioidentical, we know that they have properties that estradiol does not have, what we call like SERM-like properties, selective estrogen receptor modulator, that they actually protect against breast cancer
yep.
better than estradiol. So this idea that bioidentical is always better is simply not true. You need to look at, again, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? But the other thing about bioidentical is if you look at transdermal estrogens, transdermal meaning absorbed through the skin, whether it's a patch, a cream, a spray, systemic levels of estrogen that we use through the skin. The beauty of transdermal and why we like transdermals is because they're not metabolized by the liver, which means you don't get that bump in triglycerides that you get with oral estrogens, and you don't get that bump in blood clotting problems. So this is all good. And so it so happens all of the transdermal estrogens happen to be a bioidentical estradiol. So the advantage isn't so much that they're bioidentical. The advantage is how you're putting it in your body. And that gets
Right.
very, very confused. So, as an example, if you are a woman who's saying, okay, the reason that I personally am taking estrogen is because I want to stop my hot flashes and I have a history of a blood clot when I was taking birth control pills.
Yes.
Well, then you're a transdermal woman. We know that you are going to accomplish that end by using a transdermal estradiol, not because it's bioidentical, but because it's transdermal. But if
Yep.
you say, okay, my goal is I want to decrease my risk of developing breast cancer down the road, and I am planning on taking estrogen long term because I have osteopenia and I want to make sure it doesn't progress to osteoporosis, well, then you may well be an oral conjugated estrogen woman because we know that that is going to, more than anything else, protect your breasts. So, I mean, that's just one example. I mean, there's a million examples, and that's why one of the red flags about going to someone who's prescribing hormone therapy, if they prescribe the same hormone therapy for everybody, that's a big red flag. I mean, we're glad that they're prescribing hormone therapy. Thank you very much, because so many clinicians don't because they're not comfortable with it. But if they
Right.
say, I put everyone on a patch, well, that tells me that you're really not an expert because it's more nuanced than that. I use bioidentical patches for everybody. That's my first line for everybody. In a perfect world, a woman's going to have a more nuanced conversation about her particular health history, her goals, etc.
And then what do you say to the pretty prominent conversation that it's the progestogen that has been the breast cancer issue
Yeah.
and where that fits into
Yeah.
this equation?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we learned from the WHI is that that particular synthetic progesterone, medroxyprogesterone acetate,
Mhm.
was associated with a slight, and it was small. It was
Mhm.
really small. I mean, you would think it
Mhm.
was like thousands of women got breast cancer. It was like 7 per 10,000 extra. I'm not minimizing breast cancer as breast cancer, but it was small. And the women who had that bump in breast cancer risk were the women who, for the most part, were taking medroxyprogesterone acetate. So we have other progestogens. We don't need to prescribe that anymore. So
Right.
in general, I do not prescribe it. Um, but it's interesting also, and this doesn't get thrown out enough. The women in the WHI who did get breast cancer had a 40% decrease in their mortality over women who were not taking hormone therapy. So it was actually protective, even though they had a little bump in it. And a lot of this, just to go back and about how nuanced this is that breast cancer take years to develop, right? What was happening to the women in the WHI? They were being closely monitored. They were getting their
Yeah.
mammograms. They were getting their breast exams. And a lot of those women who were diagnosed with breast cancer, the estrogen didn't cause the breast cancer.
Right.
They already had the breast cancer, and
Right.
it was found during the WHI because the estrogen might have made them grow a little faster. Maybe we don't know that
Right.
for sure.
Right.
But they were being closely watched. So there's that. But to return to your point about the progestogen, that was one of the valuable pieces of information that we got from WHI. And so what that means is if a woman does have a uterus and she needs to protect the lining of that uterus, then we are going to offer things other than medroxyprogesterone acetate, Provera, to
Mm-hmm.
protect the lining of the uterus. Our usual go-to is micronized progestogen. The trade name is Prometrium, and I always like to stay right from the beginning. I have absolutely no financial ties with any hormone therapies. The only company I'm working with right now doing some educational stuff is Bayer for their new hot flash drug, and I'm
Mm.
very transparent about who I collaborate with and who I do not. So this is not about working with any estrogen companies. And um, but there are women who don't tolerate prometrium,
Right.
and we have other alternatives. I've done a number of Substack articles on that, the problem with progesterone. I've
Yeah.
done some podcast episodes on that. I can certainly put those in the program notes if people are interested. But the point is again, personalize. If you are someone that does not tolerate it, then we'll find another option for you.
Right. No, that's all outstanding. So you wanted to make a point about because the WHI isn't the only thing that we talk about.
Right.
There's you hear a lot of people talking about using hormone therapy now preventatively, whether it's
Right.
for cardiovascular disease, dementia, and there are a lot of statistics about 30% less mortality and 50% less heart attack.
Yeah,
We've
yeah,
all heard it. A lot of that is coming through the lens of an observational
right.
research. We can also talk about SWAN here. So let's talk a little bit about
Yeah.
what
So
those studies tell us.
So WHI, of course, was, as I mentioned, you take a group of women, you give them something, and you see the impact,
Yeah,
as opposed to observational, that you take a big population of people and you observe them. You say, okay, let's look at all the people who are taking hormone therapy in this population, and they know that they're taking hormone therapy, and then let's track them and see what happens. So I'm going to give an overly simplistic example of why an observational study can be tricky to interpret. If you take 100 people who have committed a murder, and then you say to them, how many of you ate bread yesterday? And 100% of them say, well, I ate bread. And then you can say, eating bread is associated with
right.
committing murder. Obviously, if you give
Yeah,
people bread, they are not more likely to commit murder. But that's the trap you can fall into. So that was
yeah.
a super
Yeah, but it's like ice cream sales and murder. That's actually one that people have made because
yeah,
like when there's more ice cream sales, there's more murder. It's like because it's summertime and people are out. Like
exactly,
it's like
exactly.
crime and
People
ice
have
cream
more
go hand in
sex.
hand.
People have
Yeah.
more sex in the summer, and the reason is because people wear less clothes and they drink more, which generally leads to more sex. So it's tricky. So then, okay, so let's look at the biggest observational study that we use, and that's called SWAN, the Study of Women Across the Nation. And SWAN is an incredible study. It is just like WHI, it is a treasure trove of information, but it is an observational study. So basically, I think it's in the almost the 20th year now, 19th year,
Yeah,
something like
that was
that. And basically, they took thousands of women that were in their 40s, either before they entered perimenopause or were early menopause, perimenopause, and just started tracking them. And they didn't manipulate them. They didn't give them hormones. They didn't not give them hormones. They didn't say, you do 20 jumping jacks a day, you don't. They just looked at these women and then started tracking information. And so much of what we have learned about menopause is from Swan. I think there's been what, about 400, 500 articles that have
so
come
many.
out, and it keeps on coming. It keeps on, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And in fact, anyone can go to the Swan website. We can put the link in the notes, because the articles that are published are not behind a paywall. And
Hmm.
Swan also does a great job of having fact sheets. Like, they will put
Yeah.
out a very simple fact sheet that says fact sheets about hot flashes. These are all the things that hot flashes are associated with,
Right.
And this is where we learned how long hot flashes last. This was from
Mm.
Swan, because they tracked and they found that, okay, for for white women, for Caucasian women, it's an average of 7 years. For Hispanic women and Black women, it's longer. For Asian
Yep.
women, it's shorter. Is this diet? Is this because Asian women are eating fish and
Is
white
it
women are eating
stress? Who
cheeseburgers?
knows?
And the
Yeah.
answer is no.
BMI? Yeah.
Yeah, this is they were able to look at that. So we have so much great information from Swan, but this is also an opportunity where people can quote cherry pick something. So if you say in Swan, in Swan, women who took hormone therapy were less likely to develop cardiovascular disease.
Hmm.
Okay, so some people make the leap and say, okay, well, that means that if we give someone hormone therapy, they're less likely to get cardiovascular disease. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, first, let's look at the population who takes hormone therapy. These are the people that are having hot flashes, right? It's not necessarily the general population. These are the people that have access to medical care that are being offered hormone therapy. So it's not just let's take 10,000 random people and give half of them hormone therapy and not and see which ones get cardiovascular disease. This is a defined population that also may have a lot of other things going on. Now, the other thing that's interesting, and this is where it gets really nuanced, and this is an area of interest for me, is we know from SWAN that hot flashes are associated with cardiovascular disease and with a
Yep.
lot of other, bad things. We've already talked about that.
White matter hypertensities in the brain, all the
All
things.
this stuff. So
Yep.
the question is, if you want to decrease the risk of heart disease, if you
This
want to
is the
decrease
question.
the risk of what's going on in the brain, do you give someone estrogen or do you just get rid of the hot flashes? And
That's the
that is
million
the
dollar
key
question.
question because now we have drugs, the NK inhibitors, the candy neuron inhibitors, which we can get to, which are not hormones. These are drugs that specifically decrease or eliminate vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes.
Hmm.
And so the question is if we give those drugs to women in their
Hmm.
early 50s, when they very
Hmm.
first start, late 40s, and eliminate their hot flashes, are we going to see the same benefit that we see with hormone therapy? Or is it specifically the estrogen, which is a vasodilator,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
definitely has specific impacts on a lot of cardiovascular markers,
Yep.
but we don't know. So to make these blanket statements that if you take estrogen, it's going to decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. Number one, that may not be the case if you're not someone that has hot flashes or you're done having your hot flashes. Number two, it may not be the estrogen. It may be getting rid of your hot flashes. And number three, let's look at that number, the 50% decrease. When you say 50%, and that sounds huge, but if you, again, I'll make a ridiculous comparison just to make the point. If you say that 1 out of 1 million person is going to get hit by lightning and let's decrease that by 50%, so it's only going to be 1 out of 2 million, is that really clinically significant? Absolute numbers versus if you take something that's relatively rare and say you're
Yep.
going to decrease it a lot, that's like when we talk about the risk of getting a blood clot and having a stroke when you take oral estrogen. Well, that risk is significant. It's over double. But if you look at how many women in their 50s get strokes, that number is really, really low. So while it is statistically significant, it doesn't translate to a lot of people. So this idea of well, you can't take oral estrogen, it's bad. It's like, no, let's look at your risk profile because for
Yep.
most women, it's just fine. It's just fine. So these numbers can be tricky. They can be manipulated. And sometimes, I wrote a Substack article about cherry picking, which I spent a lot of time on because I really wanted to explain this well. This idea of picking an article to make your point when in fact that article is not representative of all of the data on that particular topic.
Yeah, and it's a lot to be said there. But to put a fine point on the WHI, that was the same thing that people clobber the WHI for a bit, is
Yeah,
using that same relative risk, absolute risk problem,
yeah, yeah,
right? I mean, that definitely comes up, like the breast cancer risk. Yeah, you can say it doubled, whatever they say, but you have to go to those absolute numbers,
yeah.
or
The other thing I
yeah.
always point out, which is kind of an interesting fact that doesn't prove anything, is we know that when the WHI came out and there was that huge media blitz, and of course the numbers of women taking hormone therapy plummeted, plummeted. What has happened to breast cancer numbers in the last 20 years? They've gone up. They've gone up. So if that was the culprit, we
Right.
should have seen breast cancer numbers plummet. Now, the number of deaths from breast cancer has gone down because of improvements in early detection and treatment. But the number of breast cancers that are diagnosed since then has actually gone up.
What
Now,
about cardiovascular disease?
cardiovascular disease has continued to go up, but that's because of having obesity.
Hmm.
When we look at what's going on in this country in the last 20 years, and in terms of diabetes and having obesity, which is really, we know that these are enormous risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Those numbers have gone up. And could it be that not taking hormone therapy has had an impact on that? It's possible. Again, in the women who have hot flashes and
Right.
sleep. I mean, I cannot emphasize how important sleep is enough.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we know about particularly perimenopause and early postmenopause is that sleep is largely, insomnia is largely because of hot flashes, but that's not the only reason. We know that there are centers in the brain, the same centers that control hot flashes, that also control sleep centers, and that even women without hot flashes or who are not aware of hot flashes, Pauline Mackey talks about that a lot, about you're not
Right.
necessarily aware of those hot flashes you're having, but even in the absence of hot flashes, we know that there are problems. Within the sleep center that contribute to I fall asleep just fine and then I wake up in the middle of the
Yep.
night. And that's one of the things that the newer NK3 inhibitors, NK3 and NK1 inhibitors, which are these oral hot flash drugs that are not hormonal, are going to address is sleep, which in turn, to come back to circle back to what you were talking about, I think is going to have a big impact on cardiovascular indirectly, because we know that
Right.
women, there was a very good observational study that showed that women who get persistently less than 5 hours of sleep a night are going to have up to an 80% increase in stroke and cardiovascular disease. So if I could take my magic wand and do one thing for the perimenopausal women of America, I would have them get 7 hours of good,
Yeah.
solid, healthy sleep a night, because I think that is going to have the biggest impact.
I would agree with that. I want to move on, but I want to, just before we do, when I go to the Menopause Society page, and I
Yeah,
did, and it says we talk about hormone therapy used for disease prevention, they themselves will say lower your risk of cardiovascular disease. If you start hormone therapy within 10 years of menopause,
yeah,
you could lower your risk of
yeah,
cardiovascular disease and reduce your risk of type 2
yeah,
diabetes.
yeah.
And are they looking at that because they are very clear in their guidelines that it's not prescribed for preventative care,
Correct.
primary or secondary. So they are looking at that through the lens of using this therapy for symptomology, right? And then that's a secondary
Right.
possible
And what
benefit.
they don't say in that statement, which I wish they would kind of add, and particularly if you are having sleep or vasomotor
This
symptoms. I
is
mean, to me,
what
that's
I'm,
like, and I'm
because it
very
can
involved
cause
in the Menopause
confusion.
Society, and I think
Yeah.
that they give excellent information. They are very conservative, and I
Yep.
like that. You can be sure if they say something, they've got the evidence to back it up. And that's part of the problem that a lot of others have with them is they, if when the Menopause Society says, well, we don't have the study, and others will say, well, you're never going to have that study and women shouldn't be
Right.
denied, so therefore we're just going to, use what we
Yeah.
have. But kudos to the Menopause Society for sticking with the data. So I appreciate the fact that they even have that statement, which they would not have had a few years ago.
Yeah, fair.
It's based on SWAN data. And I personally would like to add the caveat of, if you are a woman who has sleep problems or vasomotor symptoms, it appears that using hormone therapy may long term decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. And the diabetes stuff was pretty clear cut, and that's from WHI.
Yeah.
We know that that's going to decrease. And the other thing that's very clear cut is bone, which we don't hear enough about from my
Yeah.
point of view.
Agreed.
Because when we look at osteopenia, low bone mass, and an osteoporosis, which is an increased risk of fracture, these are life-altering and life-threatening conditions that are silent until someone gets into trouble. And using estrogen is one of the ways to stabilize your bone and decrease your risk. Not eliminate it, but decrease the risk. And what people don't realize is most of that bone is lost, even while you're still menstruating. In the early perimenopause, late
Yeah.
perimenopause and so if you start it later, it's another example of someone 65 and they say, I have osteoporosis, I want to start hormone therapy. And it's like, Okay, but let's look at what that's really going to do for you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about hormone therapy use in perimenopause because
Yeah.
when I first started this, a lot of women would go to their doctors and say, "We don't do that till postmenopause. We don't do that until
Right.
you're." But increasingly, we see hormone therapy use during the perimenopause period, and where I see this personally through, we have 36,000 women in the group now. It causes all kinds of confusion
Hmm.
because you're layering hormones on top of hormones. Some women feel worse. Some women, it's
Yeah.
where are we? What do we do with
All
it?
right. So let's start by defining hormone therapy.
Yeah,
What is hormone
perfect.
therapy?
Using
Hormone
hormones for
therapy
therapy.
is any time you put a hormone in your body for any reason. So what that
Yeah.
means is if you take thyroid medication,
Mm,
that's hormone therapy. If you take birth control pills, that's hormone therapy. So hormone therapy is anytime you put a hormone in your body, as opposed to menopausal hormone therapy,
right.
MHT, which means that you are putting very, very low doses of estrogen and sometimes a progestogen and sometimes a testosterone and sometimes a DHEA in or on your body to relieve symptoms or prevent long-term problems. Very
Yeah.
different. Okay. So let's talk about what's going on in perimenopause, and then we'll talk about what kind of hormone therapy is actually going to help. Perimenopause is the time of your life when your ovaries are confused. They don't know what's going on. They're winding down, but then they're like, well, maybe I'll just jump in for one last hurrah. And they're kind of all over the place. So it's not as if your estrogen levels are high and then you have this nice steady decline until you get to zero, which is why getting a hormone level is useless and a complete waste of time because it's a roller coaster. It's up and down all over the place. But here's the piece that a lot of clinicians don't appreciate and a lot of women are not told that not only are you having these dips in your estrogen, but you're also having surges.
Yeah.
You're having surges, which are sometimes higher than even what you would have had in your 20s. And what's going to happen as a result of that? Well, you might have crazy breast tenderness. You might have an exaggeration of PMS symptoms. You might have some bleeding that's like out of nowhere. So it's not just that your estrogen levels are falling,
Yeah.
they are all over the place. And then when you look at the symptoms that people have, it's all the symptoms we talk about with postmenopause in terms of hot flashes and vaginal dryness and brain fog. And then you get the bonus symptoms like crazy bleeding all over the place and breast tenderness and insane mood swings,
Headaches and
headaches, all
nausea.
that. So you say, okay, you have hormones that are out of control. What are you going to do about that? Well, it's very simple. What you need to do is you need to suppress your confused ovaries and then replace that with something that your body's going to say, oh, I'm okay with this. So if you use a birth control pill, and I so wish we had a different language instead of calling them birth control pills, I'd like to call them just, hormone therapy, higher dose hormone therapy. What you're essentially doing with a birth control pill, which is higher dose than menopausal hormone therapy, what you're doing is you are calming down the ovaries. You're saying, you take a break. I'm going to do the talking now. And it basically shuts your ovaries down and supplies estrogen and usually a synthetic progestogen, which is going to eliminate those symptoms for the most part, smooth out your, any bleeding problems you might have, and also give you contraception, which by the way, you might still need. So is that hormone therapy? Yes. But it is hormone therapy, which is specific to perimenopause. So then let's get to the people that say, okay, well, you're perimenopause and you're still making some estrogen, but you're having these symptoms. So I'm going to throw on a patch. I'm going to throw on a little extra estrogen to help. So let me tell you what that's going to do. Take an ocean that has huge waves and dips, and this is like a surfer's paradise, right? Throw in a bucket of water. What's that going to do to the waves? Nothing, nothing. So when you take someone who's having these crazy perimenopausal symptoms and give them a little menopause hormone therapy, which is a very small amount of estrogen, it is not going to help them other than placebo, which is real, but it doesn't
Hmm.
last. Or, depending if they're late perimenopause and they really don't have a lot of estrogen around, then that might
Right.
be the right thing to do. Again,
Yep.
personalizing it.
Yep.
But this idea of giving a 45-year-old woman who's having crazy perimenopausal symptoms and irregular bleeding and then putting a patch on her is just silly. So, it just makes no sense. And I did a podcast, who Steve Goldstein is,
Hmm.
who is one of the gurus of hormone therapy and particularly
Yeah, seen him
perimenopause.
present.
And we did a podcast on explaining this, which he explains it much better than I do. And we spent literally 45 minutes talking about perimenopause and why it makes no sense to give someone menopausal hormone therapy when they are in the throes of perimenopause. Does that make sense?
Oh no, it does make sense. And
Yeah.
I see people really struggle. I see people
Yeah.
really struggle to try to dial it in.
Well, the other thing also is sometimes women will go to see a clinician who has, 15 minutes to talk to them and is stressed and has a waiting room full of women in labor and they're going with their perimenopausal issues and the doctor or, health advanced practice nurse or whoever says to them, "Well, we're going to put you on a birth control pill." And the woman walks out and is really upset
Yes.
because she says, "That person, I don't need birth control.
Yeah.
This person wasn't hearing me. They were dismissive. I wanted to talk about hormone therapy and I wanted a patch and blah, blah, blah." And, wow, I really am upset and not happy with the information I was given. They were given the right recommendation, but they weren't given an appropriate explanation. And this is, of course, one of the challenges we have in healthcare today is that it for me, in a perfect world, a menopause consult would be 90 minutes for every single
Yeah.
woman. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's actually why I started writing books and doing podcasts and all of that, because women deserve a more thorough explanation. It's also why I don't do a whole lot on social media. I don't do the 30-second video. I don't do the soundbite because that's not fair. It's not fair to make these sweeping generalizations and do these one sentence statements. And I do a once a month on my Substack for my Substack subscribers. I do once a month Ask Me Anything webinar where it's 1 hour of just let's talk about this stuff. And it's about half clinicians, half non-clinicians that attend. And we have these really good discussions. And on social media, very often I will get a question that someone wants me to answer on social media. And my answer always is, "Great question for my monthly Ask Me Anything webinar. Please join." And it's not that I'm being dismissive or I'm looking for Substack subscribers. It's you deserve more than that. I'm not going to answer your question. Not, I also don't have time to answer 5 million questions on social media, but that's not even the point. Is you deserve more than a one sentence soundbite on what to do. Like, what's the best hormone therapy? How long have we been talking about this? We've been at this almost an hour now, talking about precision hormone therapy and what might be best. And anyone who listens to this is still not going to have the answer, but what's the best hormone therapy for me? Because I can't answer that question without talking to you and knowing your history.
And why does it change over time? If we want to sort of, because I hear women talk about, and let's not talk perimenopause because
Yeah.
that's another, but they'll feel good and then seemingly things will stop working. And in some corners, they're upping doses, they're doing all
Right, right,
kinds of
right.
things.
Yeah, I think also we need to be clear that there are a lot of things going on in the 50s and 60s. Is it menopause or is it midlife? Is it normal
Mm.
aging? Is it the impact of other medications you may be taking? I mean, one of the topics I talk about a lot is libido. Is your libido in the toilet because you have no hormones, or is it in the toilet because you're taking an SSRI, or because you have so many aches and pains that you can't even think about sex and you haven't had a decent night's sleep? So this is again unpacking
Mhm.
everything that's going on. And it is so important, no matter what the symptom someone is having, is saying, okay, what else is going on? Let's
Yeah.
look at your total medical history. Are you 70 or are you 40?
Right.
Do you already have diabetes?
Yeah.
What medications are you taking? So, yeah, this is evolving. And a lot of people will say to me, "Do you need to change your hormone therapy dosage as you age?" And the answer is, in general, no. If it was working for you, again, what's it doing for you? Hot
Hmm.
flashes, sleep, joint aches and pains, bone health. How has that changed or not changed over time? And does it make sense to change your dose? But if someone is saying to me, "Okay, I am now 65 and I am having increasing joint aches and pains, which I never had before, and I'm taking hormone therapy. Should I increase my estrogen?" And it's like, hell no. Go see someone and see if you have developed a rheumatologic condition or advanced arthritis that's causing those problems, that a bucket full of estrogen is not going to help you.
Right. Right.
Or I want to, because this is an important point too, is remote hot flashes. If you have a woman who is 50 years old and she has 7 years of hot flashes and they go away. She's not taking hormone therapy. And then at 65, she develops hot flashes. Should she take hormone therapy? No. Those hot flashes are for another reason, and you need to figure out why you're having hot flashes.
Yeah.
So all hot flashes are not menopause, and all hot flashes should not be treated with hormone therapy.
And are you in the school of thought that women need to pull off of it? I mean, the guidelines have changed in that you can take it.
It depends on why they're on it.
Okay.
If you have someone who is on it for, say, bone health in general, they should stay on it because they're
Yeah.
going to lose bone if they go off. If you have someone who's on it for joint aches and pains, they will generally, have problems if they go off. One of the studies I'd like to look at is that study that with 11,000 women, the Medicare review, that observational study. And these were women who were taking hormone therapy into their 60s, 70s, and 80s, an observational study. And one of the things I loved about that study is not only did it look to see if they had long-term problems, but they looked to see why. Why were those women still taking estrogen in their 60s, 70s, and 80s? And most of them at some point have tried to go off
Right.
and then went back on. And just to be clear, these were not women that started in their 50s, 60s or 70s. These were women
Right.
that started in their 40s or early 50s and then continued. And if you looked at the reasons, it was joint pain, it was sleep. They said quality of life, which I think meant sex because they didn't ask about sex. But I think those are the kinds of studies to look to say who is going to benefit from taking this long term and who's not. If someone's
Yeah.
just taking it for hot flashes, well, after 10 years, go off and see what happens.
Look at your crystal ball for me in a second and tell
Mm.
me what happens in the next 3 to 5 years with all this. Is testosterone part of the conversation? Do we more? I mean, it is now, but we still don't have an
Yeah, I
FDA
mean,
approved
testosterone,
product.
yeah, testosterone has always been part of the conversation, but it's just gotten a lot noisier.
Yeah.
And certainly if I look at testosterone, and this is something that I've been offering to women for 10 to 15 years, off label, because we do not have an FDA approved testosterone for a variety of reasons, which I talk about in my podcast and my Substack on testosterone. But I think like everything else, you have to look at what's it going to do for you, what's it not going to do for you. And the solid data, of course, is in the libido world. But even in the libido world, we know that only 50% of women at best are going to respond to testosterone. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And the short answer is because it's, libido is multifactorial, and it might be because you just
Totally.
can't stand the snore in the bed next to you. And you have a lot of, your SSRIs are killing you, and whatever. But, the point is that it is not a cure-all for libido. And it has certainly, certainly not been shown to decrease a lot of other problems that people are saying it will. And I also think that we need to be really, really mindful of the fact that there are side effects, particularly when you get in the higher doses, and not all of these side effects are reversible. And when we look at things like voice changes, which can be catastrophic for some women, especially if they use their voice professionally, when we look at things like enlargement of the clitoris, when we look at, balding and all of that. So this is not a risk-free thing.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be really, really careful before we start telling women that everyone should be on testosterone. It's like everything else. Again, personalized and nuanced. And I think the other point that I always try and remember to make is so many women say, well, I didn't take hormone therapy, or I prefer not to take hormone therapy. Am I screwed? And the answer is no. Oh my God, no. Not everybody needs to take hormone therapy. Women need to do all the right things that you talk about all the time to take care of yourself. But the majority of women, we're looking at less than 10% of the population at best, probably lower than that, is taking hormone therapy. 90% of the population is not dropping like flies because they did not. We have to look at all the other things that women need to do to keep them healthy. But I think the population that we really, really need to pay close attention to are the ones with the hot flashes. And also, just to be clear, what you and I have really been talking about is systemic hormone therapy. Local
Yes.
vaginal estrogen is a whole different
Oh,
thing,
other
whole
conversation.
different conversation. The one sentence is everyone can take it, it's just fine, and it's going to really help you if you're having either bladder or genital symptoms. How is that for a one sentence?
That's a perfect one. I am a
But we've
big
been
fan.
talking about
Yeah.
systemic.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. I could talk to you all day. I always enjoy what you bring to the table. What do you have
Likewise.
going on? What can we tell people?
Well, first of all, if people always want to know where can they best find my information, and I'm really focusing on Substack right now because I really prefer the long form as opposed to the sound bites. I also just completed a limited series podcast called Come Again, and this is all about peri and post menopause sexuality, but quite frankly, it's about sexuality throughout your life, and it's the deep dive. It is 31 episodes, of which you
Wow.
name it, I cover it. I have a whole episode on if your SSRI has killed your sex life, if your hysterectomy has killed your sex life. Where's hormone therapy come into this? I mean, it is the most detailed body of work about postmenopause sexuality that exists. I intended it to be high level, which means that it is both for healthcare clinicians and is for non-healthcare clinicians. It is understandable for all. I have been releasing it on my Substack. At an episode a week now. It is completely out there. And starting probably in November, women will be able to access it as a product, a standalone product that they can just download the whole thing. I'm going to keep the price really, really low because I want people to have access. I'm going to run all kinds of deals, particularly for people who subscribe to my Substack, drstreicher.substack.com. Subscribe. You'll be in on those deals to be able to get Come Again and all my Substack information. And my once a month Ask Me Anything webinars, which are a lot of fun. It kind of, it's really,
Oh,
I get
you're a lot of fun.
such great questions. And yeah, and I'm out there. I'm talking, I'm giving lectures, I'm doing retreats. Just came back from Sardinia with Lisa Larkin and Pauline Mackey and Dawn New Salem, which is great. I'm going to be at Rancho La Puerto in February for
Oh,
women.
I
I'm going
love
to
it
send
there.
out some information about that because I'm all about, yes, let's learn and let's educate, but then let's get out there and move and hike and have fun and do all that kind of stuff. And so lots more of that stuff coming up. So yeah, subscribe to my Substacks. You can get in on all that stuff.
Love it. Thank
And
you so
so
much.
wait,
Oh,
before we finish this, because we are going to put this on both of our
hmm.
platforms. So now I have a question for you.
Oh.
Tell tell all of my listeners who are not familiar with you who you are, where they can find you, and what you're working on.
Oh, I am obviously Celine Yeager, but I'm saying that because I'm interviewing you. I have Hit Play Not Pause is my podcast, and Feisty Menopause. I also have a Feisty 40 Plus newsletter that is free. Anyone can subscribe to that or sign up for it. And I really work with women who are active, performance minded, and want to keep pursuing the things they love without getting derailed by these midlife shifts that we all go through. So it's been a journey. We've been here 5 years and 3 million downloads and
Yeah.
36,000 women in the
And can I
group.
just mention the reason why I adore you, and I think you've been on my podcast twice before
Hmm.
this, is because you stick with the science, which is not, you have a science background. You're not a clinician, but you have a science background. And I know that if it is leaving your lips, that this is something that women can really believe, can count on. And I so appreciate that in this
Thank you.
world of misinformation and disinformation. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you too. And I will see you at the Menopause Society meeting.
Absolutely.
Well, that's our show. Come on back next week when I sit down with Liz McKinney, a licensed dietitian specializing in glucose tolerance, metabolic health, and functional medicine. And it was a jam-packed, fascinating conversation that I know you're not going to want to miss. So come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You've been listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. The show is edited and produced by the strong, talented, and amazing women at Live Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. Share the show with your friends, and please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.